Okay, welcome everybody to Talking Niagara this morning with myself, Peter Giblett, and him, Dave Wheeler. Good morning, Dave. How are you feeling?
Hello from him. Yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm not too bad. That cough I had for a week there
Yeah.
back when I was sick for a week. Um, that's still making me cough, although I'm not contagious or anything like that. But it has a long effect, and my
You know,
mother is still in the hospital with it.
yeah, the trouble is, Dave, you're getting older.
No, I'm in denial of that.
You know,
Hey, speak of getting older, uh, Karen Fraser, and this is not the diss Karen. Karen has been acknowledged as the Senior of the Year. She's got the Senior of the Year award.
I saw that. Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations to Karen on that one.
Big
She's
congratulations to Karen Fraser, Senior of the Year.
and she's been doing some good stuff.
Well, yeah, and I guess Senior of the Year just doesn't come out of the blue.
Well, when are you gonna go for that award?
I, I think once I put a bullet to or put a gun to Karen's head and said, "Don't run this year," maybe I'll have a chance. I don't know. I That's something I never even thought of. I don't really think of myself as a senior, except when it comes to getting discounts. Then suddenly I remember, oh yeah, I'm a senior.
actually, actually, talking about senior discounts, 9 times out of 10, it's like, and unless the store owner, or somebody says, "Oh, don't you get a senior's discount?" I don't even remember. I don't even think about it.
Oh,
I'm not the one to ask for that sort of thing.
hmm.
But I've been in one or two stores, and I forget whereby I was there, and the person said, "Oh, you're due a senior discount, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, actually, I didn't know you did those sort of things." And it's like it's not, you don't go around asking for them, right?
No, no.
All right.
Yep.
So,
If I do sometimes, like if I think of it,
if you think of it, yeah, I don't think of it.
yeah, and I don't
Right.
usually think of it either. Yeah.
And it's what normally happens is I'm at the store, I'm wherever I am, and they said, "Oh, doesn't a senior discount apply to you?" And I goes, "Oh yeah, I suppose it does. Actually, I didn't know you did those things." What can I
Well, the
say?
very rare times I go see a movie, there's a seniors
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
It used to be though, you could get a senior discount providing you were watching it at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Well, the grocery store I go to has senior discounts on Tuesday and Wednesday.
Mm.
So,
Yeah,
like, I added up all like I do my grocery shop, and I think I I save by getting that. I spend about anywhere from $200 to $300 less per year on groceries. It's a 5% kickback on Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So if you
uh,
think you know,
busy working, so I can't take advantage of that.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so welcome everybody to Talking Niagara. And well, I think it's going to be shaping up for a good week for us here. Bit of sunshine this morning, I noticed. And hey, it's interesting. We've been talking about this, we've been commenting upon this. And Canada's relationship with Israel has gone from best friend to the edge of breakdown.
Well, yeah, we've been talking about this, and I think it's a long overdue. We've been pretty soft on Israel right since the Harper days.
Yeah.
The Harper days, we were extremely soft on. In fact, during this article tells that during the Harper days, there was only the United States and Canada and a handful of island nations
Micronesian Micronesian islands, yeah.
that always vote on the side of the U.S. because that means that they keep their influence with the U.S., but no other major country. And we were the ones that were backing Israel. And then the Trudeau government got very soft with Israel as well. In fact,
actually, there was
the comments that Trudeau has made, he has never even thought of the history of that area at all. And he just sees it as a political thing. And of course, Canada was stuck with the International Court of Justice, which we follow, which we support. And they've been fighting against the International Court from going after Israel for a very long time. That is beginning to end.
Yeah. And the point being is back in 2011, actually up to 2015, basically the conservatives and liberals were kind of outgunning each other for how welcoming they were to Israel.
Yeah, which makes me sick because we do exactly what the Americans do. So the Democrats and the Republicans were doing that in the United States, and we thought we had to do it together. No one is asking, what about the Palestinians? No one. When Harper went to Israel, the political cartoon was there's these fences and barbed wire in the background, and Netanyahu and Harper skipping along hand in hand, lovey-dovey, with all this barbed wire and bombs and stuff in the background. Nobody is saying anything. The Israeli lobby is very, very powerful. They're said to have destroyed Jeremy what's the Jeremy the guy in Britain? Jeremy Corbyn, yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's definitely been anti-Israel part of when he was leader of the Labour Party. Yeah, he was not anti-Israel, anti incursion. That's for sure.
Anti what Israel was doing.
Yeah.
And they had a very effective anti-Semitic campaign against him, which didn't turn out to be true at all, but was the Israeli lobby in the UK managed to do that, managed to slur him and besmirch him. And the press really didn't do their job in looking deeply enough into that.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, because he was, probably ahead of, he was like 10 years ago, he was where a lot of the rest of us are now. A lot of the rest of the states are now, right?
Well, because what's going on, and I can't understand Canada being so bad. That's one of the reasons why I wouldn't vote for Poilievre. It's because his one-sided view of Israel. He went there as a kid. He loves it. He's kind of blind to what's happening to the Palestinians, and he knows that his religious base wouldn't accept any kind of questioning of Israel. So I can't vote for a guy like that. But I wasn't too happy about Trudeau either. He was completely blind on that himself. His comments on Zionism and things like that were just too ignorant for me to believe. But now finally Carney comes along and he sees things for what they are. There's a carnage going on there. There are people oppressed. There are continually people oppressed.
Yeah.
I mean, not even Trudeau couldn't even say anything when the settler movement was starting to erupt and make victims of Palestinians more and more on the West Bank. He could hardly say anything. He just stuttered.
And while we're talking about Carney, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, a group there called that, welcomes a joint statement of Canada, UK, and France about concrete actions in response to genocide in Gaza. They're also urging Carney to follow through with immediate sanctions against Israel.
Yeah, you got to put some teeth to the statement. Yeah. Otherwise, it is meaningless. and Israeli state knows it's being criticized before, but nothing really ever happens. So they're pretty comfortable with being criticized. They just yell back, and they know nothing's going to happen because no one has the courage to face the Israeli lobby in whatever country they're from. But Carney has come up with it. The UK and France as well. It's interesting that in the article, it did say that actually it was French weapon in 1948. We all assumed that it was American weapons that were supplied to the Israelis in their war in 1948. There were a survival, but evidently it was mostly French weapons, according to this article.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a dismal track record with Palestine, and Israel's not going to go anywhere. But Israel was created out of Palestinian lands. It was a colonization effort, but they're not going anywhere, and not like we're not going anywhere either. Like the indigenous people here could say that we're on their land, and that's true, we are, and well, we're not going anywhere, and Israelis aren't going anywhere. But what they can do is get inside their borders and let Palestine begin to develop as a state on its own. On the 22% of the land, it should have had a minimum of 3/4, because at the time of the creation of the state of Israel, Israel was given more than half of the land.
Yeah.
Initially, and it only had 1/3 of the population. Yeah. So you can understand how everybody was angry from the very beginning, and of course we've been victimized by one-sided story from the press via Israel.
In a way, you just talked about French weapons that were responsible for the creation of Israel. Remember also the British controlled that territory after the First World War, and but for the British essentially permitting the formation of Israel.
You're talking about the Balfour Declaration.
Yeah. Well, that and because Balfour Declaration was early, right?
1917.
Yeah, and essentially the actions of the British were kind of accommodating pro-Israeli Jews.
In many ways, not always though, because remember that the Jewish terrorist groups,
not always,
and the Haganah and the Stern Gang targeted the British. The Mahatma Begin blew up in his goons of the Irgun, blew up the King David Hotel and killed nearly 100 people, mostly British. They attacked British police officers. They murdered diplomats. They murdered the Swedish diplomat that was trying to get peace going. Bernadotte, his name was Count Bernadotte.
But
they murdered him in cold blood. That was the Jewish settler movement, the Zionists. So
but come the end of the Second World War, of course, British influence there was waning, and the British wanted a way out of Palestine anyway.
Yeah, the Brits were broke, and it wasn't making them any money. So obviously they want out.
Well, and for them, it had been a police action for quite some time, and there was nobody else taking over in that policing role.
Well, actually, it was also they could keep a good close eye on the Suez Canal, which was vital to British interests.
That's very true as well.
Yeah, and that so that was part of it as well. And those are, and of course there's oil and all that other stuff there. But the Brits ran out of money; they couldn't control the place anymore. The Jewish terrorist groups were too hard for them to fight against. I mean, they couldn't fight against the terrorist group, so they had to get out.
And they didn't have significant troops in the area anyway. They had like what you would call a police. They had enough there for policing the state, not anymore.
It's interesting when they were when the Zionists came in and they started building on land that was supposed to be for the Arabs. the British went and they tore down their houses. So one of the things they do is they build a house, and the British come, you're in the wrong spot, so you can't be here. So they would tear down their house and chase them away. What do you think is happening ever since that time? The Israelis have used the exact same formula. They go into a place, they tear down the house, and they chase the people away.
Yeah.
And they're doing that in extreme right now in Gaza. They're bombing the crap out of it and making the place a big heap of rubble.
Yeah.
Not just chasing one family away at a time now. They're chasing whole populations away. And they're not knocking them down with a bulldozer. They're knocking them down with a 2,000-pound bomb.
But one of the things is that essentially the US is becoming increasingly isolated in this whole issue about Israel, because Britain, France, Germany are all lined up with 167 other nations, in opposition to Israel's current stance.
Yeah, but they're not doing anything. They're saying stuff, but they ain't doing anything. They're not doing a thing. And until they start doing something, it's empty words. And the U.S. knows that.
Oh, yeah.
Now, okay, make as much noise as you want. As long as you don't do anything, then that's okay. So Britain, France, Germany, Canada can say all the stuff they want, but if they don't do anything, it doesn't mean anything.
Interesting, though, I saw there was a couple of times I saw on Facebook this weekend Netanyahu wanted posters. Right. I
would change it to an unwanted poster.
No, wanted as in wanted for war crimes. Anybody who will transport this guy to The Hague will be given a reward.
Oh yeah, he is a war criminal. He's always been a war criminal. He's been a vicious man. He doesn't care how much U.S. blood and how much U.S. treasure he uses in his wars. He just wants to. If he could drain the U.S. dry, he would. And and they have some powerful lobbyists in the U.S. everywhere too. So I don't know. It's going to take a long effort, but to stabilize that part of the world is going to take some doing. Let me put it just that way.
Oh, I agree with you. And remember, this current conflict was triggered by Hamas on October 7th, 2023.
I disagree with that. I say this chapter of ongoing, it was unwisely to say it in the least. It was actually stupidly done by Yahweh Sinwar and the Hamas. But the wall in which that protected Israel was a big lie too. Netanyahu told the Israelis they were completely protected around. They had the Gaza fenced in. And what happened? A bunch of guys drove up with bulldozers and front end loaders and ripped the wall down and ran in and did all that devastation. They did it like they had no equipment. They had a bulldozer. Nobody saw the bulldozer coming to the border to rip down the fence.
Yeah. Well,
seriously. So Netanyahu lied to everybody. And as a matter of fact, I think Netanyahu loves this. I think it gives him an excuse to stay in power, and it gives him an excuse to do what he wanted to do all along, and that is kill or remove every Palestinian from Gaza.
But it's the latest incarnation of the Netanyahu government that has kind of allied itself with people like Ben
Gvir,
Smotrich, yeah, who's really done much to worsen relations with the rest of the world as well, right? Because
he wants to stay in power, and he sold his soul to stay in power. He sold his soul to these greasy, violent men who want to eradicate Palestinians, who are absolute Arab haters. or complete Islamophobes or whatever you want.
Yeah.
Well, it wouldn't be just a Islamophobe because part of the Palestinians are Christians. So he's and like he sold his soul to them for sure.
Yeah.
But he actually likes doing what he's doing. I
I
think
don't
he's in
doubt that.
glee. I think he's in glee. He loves it, no matter what he says. Oh, good! I get a chance to kill some more Arabs.
Yeah. I don't doubt that. And that's disturbing.
Yeah, I don't know. I think his dream came true when Yahya Sinwar crossed the border and did his atrocities. I think that was Netanyahu's dream come true. He could do what he wanted, and he's doing it. Unfortunately, and what is very problematic
Well,
is there is no resistance in Israel at all against this massacre that's happening.
yeah.
They've been completely controlled by their own press and their own. Um, um, One of the things we hear quite often about is how the Palestinians are taught to hate the Israelis in their schools. Well, the same things happen in Israel, where they learn about how this land is theirs and how they have to take it and expel the Arabs and stuff like that. So this this complete disregard of one side to the other, both Palestinians and Israelis towards one another, is something that's going to take a long time to fix as well. If anyone
Yeah.
with any kind of sense can go in there and get anything done, you got to get in there and take the power away, like get the United Nations in there, somebody chase the Israelis back to their own borders, get them out of the West Bank, if that's even possible, and try to establish some sort of peace. And I don't know how that's going to even happen, but
Well, according to Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, Israeli Finance Minister boasted on May 19th, we're dismantling Gaza, leaving it as piles of rubble with total destruction, which I think we've been witnessing.
yes, exactly. And when they did have that brief ceasefire, Palestinians started going back to their homes, even if those homes were in rubble. That surprised the Israelis. They felt that there's no place for them to go, so they won't come back. Well, they did. Well, that gave them an excuse to start the war again. I guess we haven't smashed it up enough yet. We've destroyed 80% of it. Let's destroy their last 20% and see if they'll live in it now. And then they say, "Oh, we got to push everybody to the south because there's going to be no food here. It's only going to be food in the south." And once they get everybody out there, they'll fill it up, and they won't let anybody back. And nobody's going to do anything about it, no matter what the Europeans say, what the Canadians say. They're gonna. I think they're gonna get jelly backed again, and just say, "Oh my goodness, oh terrible," but they won't do anything because they ain't got no real guts, especially Europeans.
Well, and there comes the irony of this. I'm not sure that we're going to see any Europeans actually going to Israel to oppose Israelis anyway. Nobody's going to send armed forces there.
No, but they won't even sanction them. They won't do anything. They'll just say some words here and there. They ain't got no balls. Oh, sorry about that. They haven't got a spine. The U.S. definitely doesn't have a spine.
Yeah.
And Israel knows it. Israel knows. We're the ones that calling the shots here. We just set one of you against the other. That's all we have to do. Call you an anti-Semite, and then you'll shut up. That's all we got to do.
So Chris is going to start his breathing exercises.
Good. I should use them right now because now I'm all hot under the collar. I should calm down by using it. Your personality show says, Dave, have you had any talks with Jewish friends to see any truth in their opinions? I have. I lived and worked in the Middle East. I lived and worked in Libya. I heard the Palestinian side of the story, which we didn't get. We didn't get it. And when the Palestinians told me their side of the story, I did not believe them. I didn't believe anything they told me until later on. I checked it myself, and they were telling me the truth. They were pushed off their land. They were forced off their land and pushed out for the creation of the state of Israel. Their land was taken from them. And during the wars, more and more of that land was taken from them. In 1897, Zionists began coming to what we now call Israel, which was then called Palestine, and started settling it and pushing the Arabs out of the land that they settled. And this continued. And then, of course, the Arabs and the Israelis, then the Jewish people then started fighting one another. And in that time period, there was the Jewish terrorist groups came up, the Irgun, the Stern Gang, and the Haganah, and they did atrocities against the Arabs. And the Arabs, of course, did some back, but the Jewish terrorist groups were much more organized, and they also murdered British policemen. They murdered 98 people in an explosion at a King David Hotel in Jerusalem. Believe me, we don't know the real history of what happened there because it's kept from us, from the news, and we only hear the Jewish side of the story. I got nothing against, like I said before, Israel's not going to go anywhere, but their incursions into Gaza and their incursions into the West Bank make, and the rest of the world saying that those are Palestinian lands, and the Israeli state ignores that, of course, aggravates the situation continually more and more.
Well, there are plenty of Jews out there here that are opposed to these current atrocities, opposed to the current war in the Middle East.
As I said before on the show, where I get almost all my information is from people like Ilan Pappé, Noam Chomsky, Norm Finkelstein, Gideon Levy, and Miko Peled. These are all Jewish guys. Most of who I spoke with were also Jewish Israelis, and they're the ones that I get my information from. They're the ones that have documented Jewish state transgressions against the Palestinians more than anyone.
Yeah, and actually, many there are obviously many Jews who would criticize this show and say that we're anti-Semite.
Yeah,
couldn't think of the word for a second.
All you have to do is say you don't like Netanyahu's comb over, and all of a sudden you're a raging anti-Semite to everyone. You know, to certain groups. The very fact that anti-Zionism is thought to be anti-Semitic is just absolutely ridiculous. It's trying to control a narrative incredibly. So yeah, I have. As a matter of fact, we had one of my old neighbors was a Jewish guy from Israel. I don't know originally what country he came to, but he went and he settled in Israel, and then he had a son. I think he needed a lot of medical attention, and they weren't going to get it in Israel. So then he moved to Canada, and he lived beside us. He was quite an artistic fellow. He was a nice man. He had artistic bent to him. He had an interesting lawn statue. Very nice fellow. Very, very, very decent fellow. And he was that an Israeli Jew as well, but he came to Canada probably for the reasons for his son needed medical attention they couldn't get. But anyway, he lived right beside me, and he was a decent dude. I got nothing against anyone, like that. I do have a problem with the state of Israel, though, and how it was created. And I, as I said before, we don't get the full story because our press and everything is mostly Israeli leaning. We get like 80% of their view, 20% of the Palestinians.
Okay, so what are the bullet
We only
points?
got 10%.
Okay, so what are the bullet points for the Jewish side of the story?
What are the bullet points? Okay, tell us the bullet points.
No, this is what Chris Simone is asking.
Chris Simone? Well, I've given you the bullet points for. I'm trying to give you the bullet points for the Palestinians, which is almost completely ignored. You can find the Israeli point of view constantly and forever in the Western press. What you don't get is the Palestinian side of it very often. The bullet point for the Jewish state was, of course, that the Palestinians complained that the Jewish state was created because of the persecution of Europeans against Jews. European Christendom, the European Christendom is was what persecuted Jews tirelessly for 1,500 years.
The last 1,000 years, yeah.
Yeah. And that persecution eventually culminated in the Holocaust. During that time, that's when most of the Jews started coming from Europe. The survivors of the Holocaust came to where they hoped would be a safe place to live. They knew they would never be safe in Europe again. They knew that European Christendom hated Jews, and the pogroms and the hatred towards Jews would continue to happen in Europe. That was their opinion. It had done so for 1,500 years. So they didn't expect it to change much after the Holocaust. So they went someplace where they thought was safe. But the problem was when they went there was people living there. Yeah. So they went back to what they thought was their old homeland. And meanwhile, there are people still living there. And the irony of it is most of those people who were still living there were probably in DNA relatives, because the Christians and Muslims that lived in the Middle East at the time were probably most likely ancestors of the Jews and others that lived there at that time, at the time of the diaspora, where Jews were dispersed all over the world during the Roman Empire. So when they came back, they came back because, of course, they weren't going to be able to trust European Christendom anymore, because European Christendom had been brutal on them, and that was obvious. And I don't think they felt safe much other place, even though in the Muslim worlds they were treated better. Christians and Jews were treated much better in the Muslim world, although they were still second-class citizens, but not treated badly. They could become rich and successful and even work in the government in Ottomans or other Muslim countries. So it's I would say that would be the number one bullet point for a Jewish state. They were unsafe in Europe, so they had to find a place to live. So they used the idea of the 1897 Zionist idea of resettling what they thought was their traditional homeland. The trouble is they had left it 2,000 years earlier, and it was full of people. So they had to displace those people to get their own homeland, you know.
But again, Jews have existed in Jerusalem for for much of the last 2,000 years.
That means number, but that means nothing. They actually existed there even before that, but they stole, like, for instance, Joshua and David took Jerusalem away from the Canaanites. All right.
Yeah.
So it was a Canaanite city that they conquered, and they made it their own. So you could say to the Jews that are living there, they go back to Jerusalem, their homeland. Well, you say, well, what about the Canaanites? Maybe the Canaanites want to put you out now, but they don't exist anymore. So it's kind of ridiculous when you start thinking.
But also you go back 1,000 years to the day of the dates of the what do you call it, the Crusades, and people like Muslim crusaders like Saladin. There was
What are you getting at here?
under his rule.
What are you getting at here?
Well, I'm just saying it's been a long. They've been there a long time. Anyway.
Well, yeah. Well, the Crusaders. There's a good example too. The Crusaders went back to the Holy Land when they took Jerusalem. They slaughtered everybody in the city. Witnesses, gleeful Crusader witnesses, delighted in the fact that the streets were running red with the blood of Jews and Muslims, unbelievers. They slaughtered everybody when they went to Jerusalem. That's what great Christians they were. So that tells the Jews again another episode in their history. Here comes the Christians from Europe. Look out, they're going to slaughter us. And that same thing happened during the Black Death. Jews were slaughtered mercilessly because they were blamed for the Black Death. There were being continual pogroms and in Russia, in Western Europe, continually throughout these years. So no wonder the Jews didn't feel safe in Europe.
Yeah.
And so of course
pogroms have been going on.
The problem was there was people there.
Pogroms have been going on in Europe for much of the last 2,000 years, and in fact, actually, just because the Holocaust was the worst of them, didn't mean to say they weren't stopping.
No, that was the point.
Much of Europe,
we're never going to be safe here. We're never going to be safe among Christians. We're never going to be safe among Christians in Europe.
Yeah.
We're not.
So the irony here
is we'll make our own country.
Yeah, the irony here is, of course, that two things. One, probably since the end of the Second World War, Jews have been safe in Europe. But two, the biggest state with biggest numbers of Jews in them, it happens to be North America, USA.
Yeah, the U.S. has probably more Jews than anyone. We have a fair amount here too. Britain has them. Western Europe.
Yeah. But I'm saying Western Europe since the end of the Second World War, Western Europe since the end of the Second World War has been relatively safe place for Jews.
Yeah, but we're talking about history.
But we're not talking about.
There has been lulls. Like for instance, Jews in Muslim Spain were very, very much better treated. They had their own temples, synagogues. They were business people. They were artisans. They worked in the government. So too did the Christians in Muslim Spain, but the Europeans were much more bigotry and prejudiced. It depended on where you were.
Yeah. And what era you're in.
In places like Holland, in Netherlands, Jews did fairly well there. They did fairly well in parts of Italy, but they did terrible in Portugal and Spain, where they were completely thrown out. They were thrown out of England at one time. They were persecuted mercilessly here and there. Their stuff was taken. So of course the Jews wanted someplace they could go that was safe. But the only way to do that was to go back to the Holy Land and push everybody else that's already living there out and say, well, this is our country and it's nice and safe. Well, it didn't really kind of work. And the country's never been able to prosper because it needs cash infusions from the United States and the rest of the West continually. And it says here, the ancient Jewish kingdom was destroyed by the Romans. However, with the breakup of the Ottoman Empire after World War I, there was British Palestine. Yes. Yeah, that's it. And so the British had, back during the World War I, had, with the Balfour Declaration, said that they would have an independent Jewish state. But I don't think they meant, if you look at the Balfour Declaration, it didn't really think they were going to have an independent state, but an autonomous area where they could live in safety. But the Balfour Declaration, and remember, the Brits also promised the Arabs their own land and their own country in those areas as well.
Yeah.
They were playing two against one, kind of.
Which is typically a British imperial trick.
Yeah. They would do anything. And plus, in 1917, the idea of getting Jewish money support was part of the idea. I think I read where there was a lot of they wanted to get sort of the Jewish populations to support the war effort, and that was one way to get them to do it. I think one of the big bankers or wealthy individuals. It's not a Rothstein, or Rothschilds. Rothschilds were during the Napoleonic War, but maybe somebody else. But I'd have to look into it a little bit closer. But basically, that was it. When a fellow by the name of Theodore Herzl had watched the court martial of Dreyfus, Colonel Dreyfus of the French army. He was a Jewish officer in the French army who was wrongly accused of treason or something like that. He was humiliated and court-martialed. And when this happened in a very, very anti-Semitic France, France was probably the most anti-Semitic country, even more than Germany at the time. They drummed this guy out of the service just because he was a Jew. And when Herzl saw that, he realized that Jews would never be safe in Europe, and he's the one that started the Zionist movement. And he thought of different places for the Jewish diaspora to go. One was Argentina, Uganda was another, and of course the third, or the one that they settled on, was the old traditional homeland of the Jews, which was called Palestine. So like I said, only about 4% of the population of Palestine at the time were Jewish. The rest were Muslims and Christian Arabs.
Yeah.
And so they had to displace them. And so they started a colonial effort to go there and to move in and to displace the people that lived there, much like we did here when Europeans came here and displaced the indigenous people.
Yeah. And like in a way, Argentina wouldn't have been a good choice anyway because of the arrival of the Nazis in the post-war era.
Well, they were worried about the existing anti-Semitism that already existed in a European type of civilization.
Yeah.
The Argentinians were strong Catholics, and they feared that they would just walk right into the same sort of anti-Semitism they faced in Europe.
Yeah. And of course, it was a Nazi stronghold for much of the post-war, for early post-war era.
Well, there was lots of Nazis in there, but they didn't really hold. There wasn't enough to really. I think if a large amount of Jewish people went there to live and set up communities, I think they could have. They would have been able to weather the storm against Nazis.
Possibly, but there was sizable Nazi influence. We hear only about a small portion of the Nazis that went to Argentina. In fact, there was quite a large German diaspora there.
Yeah, there was, but that's because there was a large contingent of German settlers that weren't Nazis prior to that. So the Nazis could hide in among the German settlers that had gone to Argentina. Argentina is made up of a lot of different Europeans, mostly Italians, but there's English, there's German, there's other groups of settlers that went into Argentina, and a large contingent of Germans. And so that's where the Nazis would hide out when they went to Argentina.
Yeah, I have an aunt who went to Argentina.
Yeah, Argentina was supposed to be about what Canada is today, except for the governments did not run. If you were to bet on what country would be farther along now in 1900, if you were to bet between Canada and Argentina, which country would be a better country 100 years from now, and you would have thought Argentina, but it was politics that held back Argentina.
Yeah.
We got lucky up here.
Okay, so moving on. An American submarine lost for a century was discovered remarkably intact off of a San Diego coastline. And basically what had happened is this had sunk during a training exercise in 1917. So clearly when they were getting ready to enter World War I, they were this is when this accident occurred. And then ironically, there's actually a US Navy training aircraft again that crashed in the same vicinity in 1950. And they found the both of them.
Yeah, it was. I'll point out something else that isn't quite in the paper yet. It just got discovered. Is a Canadian corvette in the English Channel that was torpedoed late in the war by a German submarine. Canadian corvettes were actually very, very quick, small battleships that were really good at hunting down submarines. In this case, with the reverse happened. The submarine torpedoed the Canadian corvette. That has been found. That was just found a couple of days ago at the bottom of the English Channel. Bottom of the English Channel must be littered with ships.
Probably.
Right back to the wooden ship days, but there at the bottom was
half the Spanish Armada is sunk down there as well.
Most of it didn't sink though. That's the illusion. Those ships were built very, very well. They were getting a beating from the English ship. The English had a special cannon in the 1500s. It was a very, very. They had a special name for it. They had a more advanced cannon than their rivals, and for the 1580s, and they were able to pepper the Spanish ships incredibly, and they couldn't sink them. But of course, the Spanish couldn't do anything because they were being beat up pretty good.
Well, the other thing about them is that British ships were smaller than the Spanish ships.
Smaller, swifter, and more. Yeah, and that's what made them.
And they could go, and they went down the middle of in Trafalgar. They went down the middle of two, shooting, but in both directions at the same time. You know.
Yeah, but that was. Yeah, but that's 300 years later. You know, or 220 years later.
Yeah,
because the Spanish Armada you're talking about is like 1588, I think it was. And the battle you're talking about of Trafalgar was 1805.
18, yeah.
There's a whole lot of difference between those two different time periods.
Yeah, but anyway, the Armada, and the thing about the Armada is that they were seen right from the outset. Once they coasted up the English Channel, they were seen, and the message was back in London within minutes of them.
Well, it's impossible for them not to be seen, and they knew they were coming. And Drake was able to slow them down by burning up some of their ships in Cadiz. And so finally they got this big armada going, and it was actually the weather that destroyed most of them. Because when they couldn't land in England and they couldn't stay in Holland, and they were being harassed by the English Navy, and they went around Scotland and back down. They hit a storm and some bad weather, and they made some very bad navigational errors. They misjudged the navigational error. They were supposed to swing much farther west. They didn't. They started coming down south, and they crashed into Scotland and Ireland, and that's where most of the ships crashed. It was on the coasts of Ireland and Scotland, and some of them made it through, but it was the weather that destroyed most of the ships, not the English Navy. Although the English Navy did do quite a
The
bit.
English Navy did its part, but yeah, you're right. The weather did most of it. Anyway, so interesting to find this 100-year-old submarine, because actually 100 years, Americans have actually had the submarines, had submarine vehicles since actually the American Civil War.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the very first, if you really want to go back, the very first submarine was during the American Revolution.
Yeah.
They actually had a guy in a kind of a device that he could sort of pedal a propeller or something and aim a torpedo into a boat, which would be like on a kind of like a harpoon, and then he could scram and light the wick or something like that. So yeah, so the submarines have been around for a while. I don't know when they first made service. They would, of course, I think probably during the Civil War they had one. I think it sank.
Yeah, they had one during the Civil War.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was a unique piece of, and it sank during, at one point. It was the Union forces that had the submarine.
Yes, I can't remember what side had it.
Yeah, it was Union. It was the Union forces that had the submarine.
Yeah, that was a transitional war. The ironclads, and they had already had steam power from the Brits. So steam power plus the ironclads, and of course the submarines became. I don't know. In those early submarines, I don't know. You'd have to pay me a lot to get into one of them. You'd have to pay me a lot to get into a submarine today.
To be quite honest, I wouldn't go into a submarine, but I'm fascinated by I'm fascinated by the fact that we had vehicles capable of we still have them today, capable of underwater travel.
Now, one of the things that, especially during the First World War, when the ships were up against the submarines, one of the things they did, if they couldn't shoot them or do anything with them, was ram them. And in this particular submarine, the 1917 submarine that they found at the bottom of the ocean there off the coast of San Diego, was a World War I, an American World War I F1, it was called, submarine, and it was doing some engineering work at the time, and there was two other submarines with it. Now, one of the F3 submarine hit the F1 submarine, and it went straight down. So you could tell that battering a submarine was an effective way, because even when it happened accidentally, one submarine hitting the other submarine, the submarine is said to have gone down very fast, and all but 5. There were 19, or there was 24 sailors aboard, and 19 of them perished. Only 5 survived, and so that's how fast the thing went down. It's currently at about 1,600 feet underwater, so they're not worried about anybody going there and picking things out of it. The problem with the Corvette in the English Channel is divers can get there, and they're taking stuff off of it right now. And one of a British diver was able to get the bell from the ship's bell up from the bottom of the sea there.
Well, it's a lot. It's certainly not 1,600 foot down in the English Channel.
No, and so they're able to reach it. Divers are able to reach it. Now that's a problem for a lot of people, because they felt that's sacred ground and it shouldn't be touched, because there are 5 dead there on that ship. In the Corvette, 5 went down with the ship. The others.
I understand, and I get the argument, but of course, there's people who will never think, never accept that.
No, as a matter of fact, they brought up the bell as a kind of a tribute, and the guy who brought it up, the British diver that brought it up, immediately turned it over to the Canadian Navy.
Yeah, that was a good thing.
Yeah. So
probably took him 3 weeks to find the Navy, but yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, they're the ones in the rowboat still trying to get their motor started with the pull start. And where's the Canadian Navy? Oh, it's the one that's the ship over there that's drifting away because it's lost power. And they're gonna
You and your
wait for the Canadian Air Force to come to rescue them, but they're having trouble starting their planes.
is still stuck in India.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Canadian Navy, which was Canada had the third largest navy in World War II, and we've come to a point where we can't even get we can't get even our motorboat started. Oh, how bad. Anyway, so there we have it today. That's we're getting very close to the end of our show. I got to go right on time today.
Yeah.
And yeah, we had I did my last calling last night. Qantas TV Bingo. Anyone wants to play bingo, June is the month to do it because the first 3 weeks, the first 3 Sundays are bonus bingos where the prize is 850, 850, 850, and $1,450 for the last one. But the final prize on June 27th is $2,000. So you want to get in on the June 27th. And there are, and our frequency of winners are much greater than any other kind of any lottery you want. I've known people that won multiple times playing this game. Yeah, and you also contribute Qantas TV Bingo, no matter what town you live in. That money that you spend on those cards, most of that goes right back into your community.
Yeah,
it goes for the soup kitchen. It goes for the Stanford Library. It goes to Heartland Forest. It goes to Salvation Army. It goes to the Children's Center. It goes to the early childhood care centers and all kinds of things.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Go buy your tickets.
Yeah,
go buy your
tickets. Like I said, the prize table will be big time during the month of June.
Yeah. So that's not next weekend. That's the following weekend.
Yeah, no, it's next weekend. It's June 1st.
Oh, is it?
When it starts, June 1st.
You're right. Sorry, I'd miscalculated. Yeah, my error.
Big time coin on the yeah. So if you're going to play Qantas TV Bingo, that's the time to play
it. Yeah, well, that's good. And yeah, so that's something that's done every year.
We do that every year because near the end of the year, well, it's kind of like a tip of the hat to our players to give them a chance to win some more money, but it's also keeps them interested throughout the month of June when the weather is nicer, then they have less
inclination to be there. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, be in front of a TV when the weather's nice. But it's at 8 o'clock, so most of the time it's a Sunday at 8 o'clock. But we got lots of people that bum out when we stop for the summer, but we just don't sell enough in the summertime to keep it going.
So when you finish this bundle, is that it for the summer?
Yep. At the end of June, that's it for the summer. We begin again in September.
Yeah. And of course, that's actually, yeah, but that's always been the tradition anyway. You've always missed, you've always stopped for the summer. And that's right, because the thing is, the regulars, if you're buying tickets regular basis, you don't want to be buying it in the summer when you're kind of going away, so you're going out of the region. I bought my ticket. Yeah, okay, but we're not here.
Yes. So so this is
mind you, with the internet these days, we could always just televise it the way we're doing this, right? Dave could call it online.
But we rely on the kindness of Kojiko to put on the product show for us. They have staff there helping us and everything. They do that for free. They do that for us. So we're not about to go any other network, obviously.
Yeah.
But it does limit it to the people who get Kojiko.
Yeah, I know. And that, well, actually, I used to get it. used to be able to see the Kojiko channel, even though I wasn't on Kojiko, through the through the satellite.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say
Yeah.
goodbye. It's 7:59. I got to get on my bike. So without further ado, I bid you adieu, everyone. And don't forget Gaza. That thing is terrible. It has to stop. I'm glad that Canada, the UK, and France have finally taken a step forward. It is a heinous thing that's happening there. It should never continue to happen. And why it's taken so long, I don't know. And why the governments are thinking politically instead of humanitarianly in human terms is beyond me. They're looking for what kind of advantage they get by supporting or not supporting Israel politically. No, look, it's about human beings.
Yeah.
Children dying there, women dying there.
Yeah. Let's get our priorities right.
Yes. Let's be humans for a change.